I think that we have a soul that existed before we were born and will exist after we die. So there's some part of us that exists, and that for each lifetime, that soul will choose a body and become us. I talk about this a lot in my first book, the Reasons Why book. And so the soul is the superconscious, if you want to use Jung. The mind is the conscious and the body is the subconscious. And they all have their own kind of energies to them. If your soul had chosen my body, it would be very different.
Yeah.
And vice versa. You would be having a different nationality, different upbringing, different family, all these different things.
Hi, everyone. Today, I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Brownell Landrum to the podcast. Brownell is a true explorer of metaphysical mysteries. She's the founder of the Life is a Trip Reincarnation Stories podcast. She's an author of over a dozen books and screenplays. She has a remarkable ability to dive and blend deep spiritual insights with captivating storytelling. Her work spans across different genres from, as I mentioned, screenplays. She does nonfiction titles like 5 Reasons Why Bad Things Happen, to imaginative fiction like the Do It stories and The End, as well as children's books and her upcoming We Meet Again trilogy. Thank you so much for joining me today, Brownell.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and I'm excited to get to know you.
Great. And me too. So,
yeah.
Can we start with, I know a few minutes before we got into the conversation, you mentioned to me that you have a very nomadic lifestyle. And I think it would be interesting to actually begin the conversation with getting to understand what exactly you mean by that and a little bit about your background.
Okay, great. Yeah, because you mentioned that you are too. And I
Yes.
think and then I said, well, maybe they want to hear what we're going to say.
Yeah.
And I think one of the differences that where you're going, you said, and I don't. So we can talk about how that feels, because it
Yeah.
feels really different not to know where I'm going. It started about a little over a year, June of last year. And I was living in Colorado, and my landlord decided he wanted to raise the rent 50%. And that was the kick in the butt that I needed to look at something different. I'd been there for 7 years at that point, and beautiful place, wonderful place, but it wasn't going to hurt me to try something new. And so I started setting up, and I don't know if you're like this, but I was just really goal oriented and thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and set up these plans. And all my plans just kept getting knocked off the scale. And so for example, I thought I'll go to Italy because, as you mentioned, my We Meet Again trilogy, a lot of it's set in Italy.
Yeah.
That particular story, just as an FYI, is about a famous couple from history who's reincarnated today to fulfill a prophecy that will change the world. So it's a reincarnation story with all these different lifetimes, and a lot of it touches on Italy. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Italy. And I got an apartment for a year in Italy. I was all revved up. And then all of a sudden, they weren't even taking applications. Then what was I going to do? And so I thought, okay, I could go for a tourist visa for 3 months, and then I have to go somewhere else for 3 months outside of the EU, and then I could go back. I started looking at places, and I thought, I'll go to Tunisia, which is not normally at the top of most people's mind,
Yeah,
especially
correct.
Americans. But I just thought, I've got a fan from my original novels, the duet novels you mentioned. And I'd gone to a talk about Tunisia, so I thought, I'll just check out Tunisia and see what that's all about. And so I made my trip. And then I go to Italy for 3 months, and then I go to Tunisia. And the first day I'm there, within a day, I meet a new man that was really interesting to me. There was something really this meeting. And a couple of weeks later, I'm talking to a friend of mine, and she's, oh, you need to write a story so people can get to know you better. And I thought, well, okay, what kind of story am I going to write? And as I'm writing it, and I don't know if you're a writer too, but sometimes when you write, just the stuff comes to you and it's just told to you, and all you are is like the transcriber. And in this case, it was. And I'm writing it from what I call the point of view of the upstairs. There are energies, angels, entities, guides, whatever, something up there, whatever words you want to use. And they were writing it for me. And I thought I was making up fiction, and actually I was writing them. And it was writing from their point of view. And they were sitting there telling me, do you understand how hard it is to get an American woman and a British man to meet in Tunisia? Like, this is not that easy
Yeah.
to orchestrate. And so all of a sudden I realized like the obstacles were like guideposts. And that this team was a little bit, I like to use the term border collies. Like, you're going down this way, and they're like, no, we want you over here. And so it led me on this path. So then I went to Tunisia for 3.5 months. I did not go back to Italy. I'd been dealing with a little bit of a heart AFib thing. So I thought, I'm going to go back to Colorado, get that fixed. And now I'm really not sure where I'm going to go. Through this whole experience, I have been guided by that team, and they've been telling me where they want me to go and what they want me to do. So I know that if I make a plan, they're going to block it if it's not what they wanted. So I'm going to be in Atlanta for a little while, then I'm going to do a little more traveling. I don't know.
So what happened to the British man?
You can read about that in the story that
Okay.
you mentioned. I'm going to tease you with that. It's called The End, A Love Story to the Universe is the story. And it's free, so everybody can read it for free. It's 9,000 words, so it's,
For
not even
sure.
really long enough to be a novella. And I think it's going to be more meaningful if people read it. So I'm not trying to be coy, but it really was very powerful in that I knew that they wanted us to connect. And what I've learned from that experience has been golden. It's been really powerful. So I won't say any more than that.
No,
I'll let you
don't.
and your readers and followers read the story. And I will give you a hint that they're telling me there's more. So there's some kind of sequel in the works, and I
And
don't even know what that is because I just wrote like the first few paragraphs and I thought, okay, now I see where this is going. This is going to be interesting. I can't wait to write the rest. But what about you? You said you're nomadic too.
I'm nomadic, yeah. But like I said to you earlier, I know where I'm going. It's not, I have two homes in Singapore and in Barcelona in Spain. So of course,
Ah, I love Barcelona.
yeah, I divide my time between the two. And then I have family in India. I have family and friends and my daughter living in the States. And I have that itch every like, if I'm in a place for around 4 weeks, I'm starting to get restless and I need to find somewhere to go very quickly. And I've been doing this my entire life. I think I'm a born traveler and born nomads. I've actually inked myself saying to travel is to live. That's what I really believe in. And I feel like the kind of experiences that travel gives you and the kind of connections that you make while you're traveling, and sometimes very unexpectedly, like what's been happening to you and with you, I think is what makes life so special. And I think it's what keeps me going. And that's what gives me the impetus to want to continue to do it. And I like to integrate with different cultures, to get an understanding of different cultures. And I think I'm on a constant learning mode. And I do that also with my podcast. It adds to, I always say to everyone that asks me why I started with my podcast, I have two shows and why I started with them. And I say, mainly because I like connecting with people. And secondly, because every single conversation makes a difference, not just to the people who are listening or watching, but also to me. And again, I say that I'm on constant learning mode because your experience or anyone else's experience or the kind of stuff that you do or someone else does or the other person does is something that I may have no understanding of. But by the end of the conversation, I'm interested, I'm curious. And I think curiosity is something which has been in me for the longest. And that's what
Yeah.
I believe in. And that's how I feel about. But again, I will have a plan to where I'm going, unlike you, which is interesting, which is also very fascinating and interesting. So I want to understand a little more about you and where you come from. And you mentioned that this current story of yours is also, it's just 9,000 words, but it's also fiction and not fiction, sorry.
It's kind of a magical realism.
Yeah,
It's, if I have to put it in a category, yes, it feels really real to me, and they are real and they are talking to me, and I've got the voices in my head or whatever. And yet there's definitely fictionalized parts of it, right? It's not, in fact, you mentioned my podcast, and I was thinking about my title, Life is a Trip, and that really fits your life perfectly.
yeah,
And I need t-shirts so that you can be wearing, you need that on your inked, as you can have Life is a Trip.
yeah.
Is one of the things that's key about that podcast, and we also have a Facebook group with the same name, is I'm very open about saying the stories can be fictional or factual. And I sometimes they seem to blend. And so you're writing and you're like, I'm not even sure where this is coming from. Truth comes through. So whether it's factual or not, I don't know, but it's still like my tagline for my writing really is lose yourself in the fiction, find yourself in the truth. Right. So it is about just, and so that particular story, there's fiction, definitely. And there's also truth. And so but it is my most personal story that I've ever written. That's for sure.
So I want to ask you, how did you get interested, or what was the connection? Because you talk about reincarnation and past lives, right? How did that actually come into existence for you? Was there like personal experiences? You've mentioned that you hear voices, right? So is there has to be some point in your life that actually made you believe that reincarnation and past lives is something that is for real.
I think there's two answers to that. One is just in my personal life, and the other really has to do with why I'm writing about it, which are two different answers, right? One is you can have your own belief. And my very first exposure really was Shirley MacLaine, which is probably true with a lot of people, and seeing the miniseries she did Out on a Limb and reading that book. And that was my first exposure. And then I started reading stories, and I kept having a recurring dream that I call a dreamery, which is a dream that's a memory. And so that kind of set me on that trajectory of looking into that whole phenomena. And then I read Michael Newton's books. I don't know if you're familiar with his books. His are all about what do we do on the other side and what happens when we're not here, or upstairs, I call it, what's going on up there. And that was really fun about the story that I just mentioned, the end love story to the universe, is getting so much more information about how it works up there, because to know there's a team, and there are sometimes vast teams that are working on your behalf, is such a different kind of phenomena to most people. Most people think, oh, I maybe have a guide, or I have this source, or this angel, or whatever, or this higher self, but it's much more complicated than that. And it's also, if you read the story, you'll find that they're not infallible, and they're doing their best too. Like we think, oh, they know everything and we're just the ones floundering around here. No, it's a teamwork, and we're part of that team as well. So that kind of explains a little bit of that, because the other side and what happens is really interesting to me, and it's becoming more and more interesting every day. And then as far as writing, I wrote my first novel. My first book is nonfiction about 5 reasons why bad things happen.
Yeah.
But my first time I wrote fiction, I thought, I'm just going to write a love story. And then when I realized, I thought, no, wait, when I wrote the first book and I thought, I want to write a sequel, that's when I thought, you know what, I'm going to write it in terms of reincarnation. And that was, now I look back and think how crazy I was, but I was a little bit nervous about putting myself out there as that kind of writer. In some parts of the world, like India, there are lots of stories about that, but truthfully, in the rest of the world, there isn't. Even though 1.5 billion people believe in it, there aren't that many stories. And that was putting myself out there. In fact, I considered a pseudonym, but as you mentioned my name, Brownell Landrum, and I can't hide. I'm the only one in the world, though. I might as well just be who I am. And so when I started writing that, and I thought, this is fun to write. These stories are really fun to write a couple and then write who they were before and who they were before. And it adds so much dimension, and it just was a blast to write. And I found that it really meant something to people. I found that really honestly that nonfiction versus fiction, a lot of times fiction opens people's minds a little easier. They can suspend their disbelief. They don't have to sit there and tell, they wouldn't pick up a book on reincarnation nonfiction, but they'll read a story just like they'd read time travel.
Yeah.
So I do find that is getting into that world has been just so much pleasure to write. And now my mission is to get more people to write these stories. And that's the purpose of the podcast.
Have you gone into your past life? Have you ever tried to do that?
Yes, I've done it a number of times. And I have definitely several past lives that have different kind of messages for me. The most interesting thing for me these days is to go to the between lives. In fact, I've got somebody who says, okay, I'm trying to do between lives, Michael Newton type of regression. Will you do that? And I was like, yeah, because I want to hang out with that team. We got to sit down. I might be hearing voices, but I want it in person, if you will.
Yeah.
You know?
So can you define in between lives for people who don't understand what that means?
Yeah. I turn again, first of all, that this is how I see it. And if you join our Facebook group, you'll see a lot of different points of view. And I really encourage lots of different points of view. I suspect you would too, given your whole view on travel. I don't want to hear the same thing everywhere. I want to hear different voices and different perspectives.
Yeah.
So this is just how I look at it. But I think that we have a soul that existed before we were born and will exist after we die. So there's some part of us that exists, and that for each lifetime, that soul will choose a body and become us. I talk about this a lot in my first book, The Reasons Why book. And so the soul is the superconscious, if you want to use Jung. The mind is the conscious and the body is the subconscious. And they all have their own kind of energies to them. If your soul had chosen my body, it would be very different.
Yeah.
And vice versa. You would have a different nationality, different upbringing, different family, all these different things. And so that's what happens. And then in between lives, and that's what I like about the Michael Newton, part of it, yes, is evaluating what we just went through in the previous lifetime. And part of it is planning what we're going to learn in the next one. But we also have jobs up there. There's stuff that we do when we're not here. And one of the things I also is a question that I think might come up in people's minds when I'm talking is that I do believe that there's a part of us that's still, quote, upstairs, that we don't send out our entire energy, that we send down a portion of ourselves for each lifetime. Then the question is, then what are we doing when we're not here? What is that part of us that's not here doing? And I just loved the Michael Newton perspective. Some people are out there painting sunsets every day. I remember doing a meditation and found there was somebody in charge of the lottery. That was her entire job, was figuring out who should win the lottery, how do you get them to buy a ticket, what's going to happen to their life, how does it fit into their plan. I just thought that was so funny. So looking at different things that we might do when we're not here. Have you ever delved into yours? Do you have any idea what you do when you're not here?
No, I haven't.
I'm going to nudge you to do that. And I'm going to nudge whoever's listening and watching to do that. Because sometimes people think, oh, I always thought I might have lived in this place, or I always have this idea. And I think we all have the potential to be a writer of, at least at some level, of just sit down and write what comes to you. And if you're taking off the filter of, oh, I have to prove it, or it has to be nonfiction, and just say, I'm just going to write whatever comes to me, and whatever it is coming to you for a reason and something you to learn. But I'm going to nudge you to do that, to figure out what might you do. Some people are in the healing world and they help souls heal, because sometimes after a really tough lifetime, they need that. Some are guides to other people. Some might be what I call the traffic angels that are putting these people together. Some people are out there creating new flowers or new fish or new planets. There's so many different things, and it's just fun to think about what you might do when you're not here.
Interesting. Yeah, actually quite fascinating. So I wanted to ask you, you yourself are talking about it, but metaphysical and spiritual themes are becoming very interesting now. So how do you see the future of storytelling evolving in this space? You've already, through your podcast, you've already got people to write in little stories, right? And most of them are around these themes. But how do you think it's evolving?
I definitely know that I started the Facebook group a little over a year ago, and it was with the intention of getting more stories and just hearing people's stories and having people share stories. And then it evolved into the podcast. And I as I mentioned, I've written a bunch of stories. My duet novels are reincarnation. I have children's stories on that. I have screenplays about it. I even pitched a TV series to Hollywood. And then I have the new We Meet Again trilogy that's coming out next week. And so all of these things I have, and then I'm thinking, I don't want to be the only one. And I know that's crazy. There are other people, but there aren't that many. And when I was pitching that TV series, I outlined hundreds of possible episodes. These stories could go on and on, so many. You've listened to a few. They're so different, right? The stories that we have up there are so different. Some of them are funny, some of them are really poignant and deep. Some of them are just, you got to sit back and think, okay, I got to listen to this again. And I just thought, let's invite as many people to write these stories as possible and see. And I'm even in the process of kind of sending little emails to Hollywood to see if somebody picks it up. And when I did the first contest for this podcast and what looking for stories, I had so much fun telling people they won, more than if I had won a contest.
Yeah.
And so if Hollywood calls up one of my other writers and says, "Hey, I want to take your story and make it into TV or film," I feel really honored by that. And even if it's not me benefiting financially, it doesn't matter. It's benefiting the world, and I'll benefit just from helping the world. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's, I want to see more of this. I'd love to see TV and film that is mainstream stuff, and have these kinds of conversations and get more writers and more people to explore these things.
What's next for you? I know you're leading a nomadic life. I know that you have all these voices in your head talking to you. I know that you've written so many, you've explored different genre of writing, and you've made so many connections through your different kinds of writing. But is there, are you just going to go with the flow, or there is something beyond that you are excited to explore now?
That's a fantastic question. It's a two-part answer, right? One is, what do they want? Because I'm going to have to go with wherever they take me. If my We Meet Again does really well and Hollywood says, because it's structured to go to television, so it could easily be adapted for television, then that might lead me somewhere. I could meet the love of my life. That could lead me somewhere. I could just be guided someplace, sometime. As far as writing, I've got two books that are in process. I have written the screenplay for both of them, and now I want to write the book version. So I'm looking forward to that. One of them is actually a musical, and it's really turning into fascinating adaptation. I've never seen a book like this before. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I'm about halfway through that. So I want to write the book version of that, and I'd love to have that made into a film. I really think it's a really special story. It's called Denouement, The Art of Letting Go. And it's, now I'm going to totally date myself, but it's like The Big Chill meets It's a Wonderful Life as a musical. It's about a documentary filmmaker who is cajoled into going to this event to interview this wild cast of characters that his aunt set him up with. And he is grieving and does not want to go. And his aunt talks him into it. And I just want to get in, get out, and get home. And instead, he's confronted with the one thing that terrifies him the most, and that's joy.
That's joy.
So, and joy, right? And the other one is called Inspirators. And as with the other one, I've written the movie script, and it's more like a middle grade, young adult type of story. And it's a pre-utopian. We have a lot of dystopian stories out there now. This is a pre-utopian. What could the world be? And all these things you and I are talking about today, there's so many metaphors of all this meaning of life stuff thrown into this really fun story about these kids with special abilities. And they're on an isolated island. And so that one, I have written the screenplay, and that book is turning into interesting because I'm writing it from first person plural. And only maybe a dozen books in history have been written from that perspective. So that's its own fun challenge, is to get that one done. So there's plenty of more. And of course, the end, as I said, there's a sequel in the works of that. I don't know where that's, because that may be me writing and them telling me what they want me to do next. And I don't know. I just want to, part of me really wants a really simple life, really relaxed life, and just to write. But then they may have some other plans and say, not right, yeah, but not yet. I don't know.
Oh, it's been so nice talking to you. Thank you. Any last words for the listeners and the viewers that you would like to share?
Well, thank you. I'm sure you're going to have my link so that I really love for you to read the end. Like I said, it's free. And join my Facebook group if it sounds interesting to you, because that's really going to be fun. And through that, you'll find more about the podcast and my novels, just as much as I can share my voice. The first novel in the trilogy is 99 cents. Hopefully, that makes it easy for people to say, let me see what this is about. And just for them personally, as I'm suggesting to you, write. Just put it down. You never know. Like, where might I have been in Barcelona before? What is it about Spain that guides me? Why am I feeling this energy? And what lesson is it in it for me? And maybe you'll have a story yourself and be able to share that with the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do some writing. It's not that I don't, but yeah, you've given me an idea to write about. Thank you. It's been lovely talking to you.